Last week was Easter.
What?
I know, right? It was already a week ago. And so what we did last week is we took a break from Nehemiah. We did an Easter lesson instead, but now we're getting back into the book of Nehemiah this morning. We're going to actually finish the book of Nehemiah today. And you know, it's funny. I wish I could claim that I planned it this way, but the last chapter of Nehemiah is a perfect follow-up to Easter. Because for so many, Easter is this spiritual high point where we're all excited about God and Jesus and what He's done, and it's so great, and we're very excited, but then the question is, what happens next? Right? What happens after that spiritual high point? And as we're looking at the book of Nehemiah, throughout this book there's this literal buildup, right? They've been building the walls of Jerusalem, and there's been all this buildup and excitement moving towards the restoration of the people and identity and faith of the Israelites. Prior to the events of Nehemiah, the Israelites had very recently returned to Jerusalem after years and years of exile in Babylon. And as the events of Nehemiah unfold, there's all of this good stuff happening. Remember that they stand before the Ezra as he reads the word of the law, and they're listening to hours and hours of scripture being read. They're confessing their sins. They're so fired up. There's this revival happening. They're repopulating Jerusalem, getting resettled as the Israelites in their chosen place and nation, and it just sounds so great, right? They're so fired up about God, and they're committed to action and doing what is right, and even bring down a curse upon themselves if they don't follow what God tells them to do. They're so excited, but the same question stands: what happens next? What happens after the spiritual high point? And that's what we're going to look at here as we close out Nehemiah 13. We're going to look at verse 6 and 7. I'm going to read a couple of verses here, and I think you're going to get the point. In verse 6 it says, "But while all this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Sometime later I asked his permission and came back to Jerusalem. Here I learned about the evil thing Eliashib had done in providing Tobiah a room in the courts of the house of God." Skip down to verse 10. It says, "I also learned that the portions assigned to the Levites had not been given to them, and that all the Levites and musicians responsible for the service had gone back to their own fields." Skip down to verse 15. "In those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys, together with wine, grapes, figs, and all other kinds of loads. And they were bringing all this into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Therefore I warned them against selling food on that day." So there's this huge revival, spiritual revival in Jerusalem, and then Nehemiah had gone back to Babylon for a bit and returned, and what did he find? They had fallen back into what they were doing. Tobiah, if you remember Tobiah, he was the guy that violently opposed the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. He now had his own personal room in the temple of God, strictly forbidden. They were not following the Sabbath laws anymore. They are ignoring what God had commanded them to do in that regard, right? The Levites, who were responsible for making sure that the temple service was happening, they had left. They were gone because people were providing for them, and because they decided to go back and they had to do their own things in their own places. So again, in almost all, I didn't even cover the scriptures that said that they were intermarrying. Like, they were doing a bunch of other things that they were not supposed to be doing. They had fallen back into the way that they had been before. Yeah. And it's so funny as we look at this and we're like, oh my gosh, they're so terrible. But this is something that we all do, is it not? It's something that we all do in our faith. Something that we all do in multiple areas of our lives. We get excited, we get fired up, we're going to do something different, and then we just go back to the old way. I was even thinking about my exercise routine. Over the last few months I've been trying to do more working out, trying to be under doctor's orders to do some more exercising. And so I've been doing it, it's been good. And even yesterday, I woke up and I was kind of excited, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go for a run. And I was like, yes, so I did. I got up, I went to the cul-de-sac, and I ran approximately a mile around our neighborhood. Terrible mistake. awful decision, full of regret. I'm lying on my living room floor after my run, heaving. I'm dizzy and I'm sweating, and I feel so awful, and searing pain is all over my body. And you're like, health is not that important. This whole exercise thing, not that important to me. And so as a result, chances are I will probably never run again this whole year. Right? It's just, I woke up excited, and then I did a thing, and I'm like, nah, I don't want to do that anymore. Right? But isn't that so common for us? Isn't that who we are? That's what we do. And of course, that habit, that like very exciting mountaintop experience, then back down the valley, it has huge implications for our faith. And not good ones for our faith. Because we go to these places where we're so excited for a moment, but then we don't follow through. We don't stay consistent. This is what happened to the Israelites here. Instead of taking that mountaintop experience, instead of using it to continue to build conviction and continue to grow in consistency and sustainability in their faith, they just tanked. They didn't stick with it. They let it peter out, and so they abandoned what they knew was right. And I wish I could say that this was an isolated incident in the Scriptures, but certainly it's not. It's literally the whole story of the Old Testament, for one. But also, if you go into the New Testament, it happens there too, even to the people that knew and walked with Jesus. Even the people that followed Jesus. After Jesus had died and resurrected, you know what happened? Let's take a look here in John chapter 21, verse 1. It says, afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples. Keep this in mind. This is not the first time they're seeing him. By the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing, right? So what did the disciples, these people that had in fact already seen the risen Jesus, Jesus already came back from the dead and visited them, they didn't know what to do, so what did they do? They fished. They went back to what they knew. They went back to the old. They went back to what they were doing before they knew Christ. Again, like we so often do. Where are you at right now in your walk, in your relationship with God? Maybe you're in that high point. Awesome. That's so exciting. What are you going to do to keep it going? How are you going to continue to stay faithful and continue to build conviction? How are you going to avoid your faith becoming stagnant? How are you going to avoid it just from going back to your old ways? Or maybe you're already there. Maybe your faith is stagnant. Maybe you have gone back to your old ways. Maybe you're not really walking with God at all right now. How can you get back? How do you get back to that place of learning and growing and changing in radical ways for God? It's something that we have to ask ourselves. It's something that we have to go after, right? How do we make sure that what we're learning and growing, how do we keep it going? Or even take Sunday morning, for example. For so many of us, this Sunday morning is like the spiritual high point of the week. But does this time together have any bearing on the other 6 days of your life, really? Do you learn something here that you're able to take with you? Do you make connections here that you're able to take with you to continue to build in your relationship with God? Or do you Sunday high point and everything else is just the same as it always was? How can we ensure that what we're learning, we're actually taking with us? How do we build that consistency in our relationship with God? That's the question that I want us to be talking about today. But I'll close off with this passage here in 1 Corinthians 58. It's a very encouraging passage. It says, therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Today, let's talk about what it looks like, what it takes to stand firm, to continue to give ourselves fully to the Lord, day after day, and not just until we're tired or distracted or just not wanting to do it anymore, discouraged. Let's make that commitment to actually do something about it, regardless of where you're at right now. And as we do that, let's see how God allows us to change. Let's see how God works through us and allows us to change and allows us to be molded more and more into the image of Christ. Amen? Amen.